I'm Julie Johnson, and welcome to our conversation about protecting communities from culty influences. Fihmiya, you can go ahead and go.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that I was clicking on to the right
Yeah,
button.
you're
Hi,
good.
everyone. This is Fihmiya. I am coming to you guys all from Michigan. Some of you all know me as the community manager and the social impact advisor. So we're super excited to have you guys in a live and engaged session. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we're talking about something that's not often talked about in especially community spaces. So the people we're really talking to today are people that are either you're building a business in community, maybe you're launching a business geared towards community, or maybe you're a community manager or you're a learning experience designer that likes to use community as a way to upskill or reskill. Those are kind of my people. We're kind of talking today about like when do our best interests or when we're seeking that in business, or how can we tell signs when we are exhibiting healthy behaviors, and when maybe possibly when we're looking for maybe exhibiting aspects of coercive control or culty, we call it, aka culty behaviors. um so hold on one second. I'm gonna go. Okay, so hold on one moment. I just want to make sure that there we are. Okay, we're good. We're on here. Okay, 27 attendees. Here we are. Okay, and I'm looking on my LinkedIn now. Okay, hey everyone. Okay, so just so we know, can you see the chat box, Fihmiya?
I can see it, but I had a member who says they can't see me and it says waiting for the host to start.
Okay, it says now. Okay, now I can see it. Okay, we're starting. We're on. Let me make sure we're on ours. Um, we should be good to go. Yeah, we're live. So on our end, hold on. Um, Tap to join. Okay. Make sure. Oh yeah, we're good. We're good. Okay. Okay, now they're on. We're on.
Oh, we're
Sorry,
on? Okay, cool.
we are on. Okay.
We'll reintroduce
Yeah, we're
ourselves.
live. So on our end. Okay. So okay. So welcomes. Like I said, we're talking about what happens when communities, what happens when we can, how we can cultivate green flags in community, right? And how can we kind of learn to cultivate that within ourselves, and also what to watch out for. So, anyway, and a learning experience designer. I'm Julie Johnson. I helped co-found Integrate Trauma Informed Network, which we're a community of practice that uses reskilling and upskilling to help human care providers upskill and reskill in trauma informed skills. And also, we also help in the reskilling for anyone transitioning from human care to like the tech space. So, and Fihmiya is our community manager.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I am the community manager and social impact advisor for Integrate. So I am very blessed and very lucky to be working alongside Julie, and I'm coming to you all from Michigan. So we would love for you guys to type in the chat box where you're dialing in from. I know Scott is from the deep into the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
So thank you, Scott. And I see Sarah.
Sarah's in Virginia. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. Um, but I wanted to start out today just with a quote. Some of you all may be familiar with Sarah Edmondson. She's got a rising popular uh what's the word? A podcast called A Little Bit Culty, and she's a survivor of the Nixium cult. Which was like a wellness cult. It looks like a lot of people, actually it looks a lot like a lot of the it was like a business wellness business that looked like kind of some of the things we see on LinkedIn, which is why we thought this was appropriate. But she is a survivor of that cult and one of the co-hosts of A Little Bit Culty. I want to start out with this quote from her just to kind of help us understand that like culty things aren't just like robes. We're not just putting on hats. It's not like this thing over there. It's everywhere. And I think she's a really good teacher for people that are just kind of seeking community, seeking connection. She's a really good teacher in helping us understand just how common it is, right? I think before I read her quote, I also just want to say, Fihmiya and I aren't experts on this, but we are like survivors in our own right of it. Okay. And we're just wanting to vocalize and kind of bring awareness to this in community spaces, community learning spaces, and particularly in the business world. There's a lot of talk right now about toxic culture. And I think underneath that, there is an underpinning this conversation that's not happening around coercive control. And but a lot of us don't know how to spot it because we haven't naming it. So in the spirit
Mhm.
of just making sure we understand what context we're coming into, we're just wanting to name this so we all have a better understanding of what we're looking for. And to also point you all into the directions where you can seek help, you can get good help, and you can get a support group if needed. Um, so we are not the experts, but we will show you some in this podcast or in this in
Yeah,
our
and then
go ahead.
yeah, and then to add on to what was Julie was saying is, Julie and I have like talked behind the scenes and had some conversations about our own experiences about some culty behaviors that we've kind of experienced in some of the spaces where we've been in. So we're going to share that without obviously disclosing any private information, but just to kind of give you guys the idea or the experiences of what we've gone through and what we've picked up along the way and how we become more mindful, right, and aware of
Mhm.
spaces we enter and build.
So we're gonna open up with this quote from Sarah. Can you cut and paste that and put it into the chat by chance for me? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things that can be helpful in terms of an explanation is to look at ways in which cults are similar to abusive relationships. Nobody seeks out an abusive relationship or an abusive partner, but so many people stay in these relationships longer than they should. Kind of like jobs sometimes, right? They make excuses, they ignore red flags, and they allow themselves to be emotionally manipulated. Okay, because like a cult is an abusive relationship. You are sometimes in an abusive relationship with the system, and business is attached to it. Okay, so just something to think about. That's from Sarah Edmondson. Just something to think about as we open this is nobody's seeking this. Nobody's like, I can't wait to be abused and manipulated and taken advantage of, but we fall into it, right? And that's manipulation. That's why understanding coercive control and understanding the red flags before we're so far in, before the trauma happens, that we can see those red flags, right? And we learn to trust our own inner intelligence, right? Intuition, if really, or that gut instinct is really important, right? And to always stay in touch with that. And if something doesn't feel right, investigate and build those critical thinking skills. Um, okay, so in saying that, Fihmiya, why don't you start with your own story and kind of how you have found yourself in this in the workspace and how you have found yourself to kind of move through it and what's helped in the outside of it. How did you find it? How did you walk yourself through that process?
Yeah. So for me, when I started, and this is for everyone, this is like my own personal story when I went through. So when I was an educator, um, I was very much in a space where it was very toxic. It was very stressful. It was very overwhelming and very overwhelming for me at many times. And, I have stories and I'm okay to be vulnerable, right? I've learned to accept this and be okay with sharing parts of my story that are pretty deep. But I would go to my boss and I would tell her that I need help, I need support, but all of that was quickly diminished and kind of pushed under the rug. And there was a lot of love bombing that kept happening and a lot of manipulation where I would be told, you're okay, you're fine, do it for the kids, do it for the kids. So a lot of um, the advice or feedback I was given was directly flipped back onto me to make me feel guilty for actually asking for support. And I would let it go and I would come back. But it got to a point where I was so deeply affected that it affected my mental health and my well being, to the point where I was resenting a lot of people around me, didn't recognize who I was. It started affecting my personal relationships. I knew something needed to be done. So, not to get so much into the story because, we're so limited with time, but I actually went to a therapist. I knew I needed outside help. I needed an expert who can kind of give me some unbiased opinion and support. And she, on her own, had said, for me, are you a part of a cult? I was like, what? So, hearing that word really threw me off. And when we sat down, I started to realize a lot of the behaviors that were put in um, did show characteristics of a cult. The manipulation, the course of control. I was micromanaged to a T. Um, I was not allowed room or space to be me, and it was very rigid. It was very robotic. If I tried to ask for support or go to another individual, I was reprimanded or I was pink slipped, as they call it in the educational world. And you were not allowed to talk to any colleagues. You had to go directly to the person who was seen as the hero, who was showing that complex. And she was very much it. And yeah, when I look back at it now and I write it down, I was like, geez, I was like, these were such telling signs um, of a cult leader. And when I left, what was the biggest one for Julie and anyone hearing is when I did decide to leave, um, there was a very big commotion that happened that she gathered everybody in a room because I had left for my mental health and said, this is unacceptable behavior. We don't do this. And I'm like, well, since when is somebody leaving for the sake of their mental health a bad thing? And when I discussed that with my therapist, she's like, this is just really weird and very odd, very manipulative, coercive control to make you feel bad so that you would feel guilty enough to come right back because they didn't want anybody to understand or see or know what was happening at that in that space. Um, so yeah, there's a lot to it, a lot to unpack, but very traumatizing to say the least. So it's made me very aware of the kind of community spaces that I want to build and why I'm so passionate about building inclusive, very intentional, collaborative spaces for people that come through.
Right, and for me, mine was, in my early days of teaching, when I was back in the classroom, I mean, I wasn't in there for too long, but, my first year, I find it interesting it both came from education. It was my first year teaching, I was a mentor, my mentor teacher was, had created, like, a triangulation of people around her, and, she was very threatened by some of my ideas,
Mhm.
but everyone around us, no one wanted like, everyone would side with her because they didn't want her to bully them. So she had kind of created this culture where, everyone would side with my mentor teacher, my student teacher, who was dependent on my degree at the time, um,
Mm,
to, make sure that her ideas were backed and believed, and then at one point in time in that process, I had to be mediated with my boss, and my boss at the time, like, backed her, in the mediation, and that's why I always those conflict resolution, I mean, this is a whole other subtopic, but, like, trauma-informed conflict resolution is really important. It's really important that we, in those spaces, we're not asking, people that are being, in spaces of coercive control, we're not asking them to, some solution, we're not asking them to constantly have to make all the changes, but there's
mhm,
multiple aspects to it. So there's still a lot we need to do in the HR world and in the world of employee wellness to understand when there is workplace bullying and coercive control that we're not making someone do all the work, that there is a little bit more of a system of accountability, because what happens in the school system, but not just teachers, but even my own kid, and even in the workspaces and some other places where I've done some contract work, there it was always the person that was being targeted that had to make all the changes,
mhm.
right? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that's really, a systems issue on how we work with coercive control. Um, Scott says hold on, Scott just came in. I love guys, keep it in the chat, we'll read them. Can you read that? I can't
Mhm.
for some reason. Can you read
Yeah.
Scott's?
So, yeah. And feel free, everyone, drop your thoughts, your questions, your own experiences, your own stories. We definitely want to keep this going and engaged. So, Scott said, it's evident in my own experience as well as both of yours. Too often, the people Oop, let me go here because it's not showing up fully on my end. Sorry, Scott and everyone else.
Sarah says it's like blaming the victim. Top roles are not leaders at all, merely managers and poor ones at that. Yeah, lots of times, I think that that's what's come out in my situations and why we're bringing it to LinkedIn is, it's a systemic problem. When you make someone that is been targeted do all the changing and there isn't a system for and even in some aspects of, because we're talking to some trauma-informed people, restorative justice has a
Yeah.
big issue with this too. There's a lot of sometimes people will do restorative justice circles in workplaces as a point to, alleviate or do conflict resolution, but even in conflict resolution, sometimes there's still that victim blaming, or maybe making the victim do a lot of the heavy labor. So that's just, I don't have any solutions to that. It's just something to take to plant a seed for, is how, and
Mhm.
that's an inquiry. How can we create systems of accountability where then when, aspects of coercive control has been identified? Is there, and that's what I love about Stephen Hassan, which is what I love, the bite model, is a great, evidence-based, it's been tested a lot. There's still some tests on it, but it's gone through a lot of the academic, rigors of what's being considered evidence-based. But Stephen Hassan is a cult expert, and he has a model about how to self-test for coercive control. So good. So you can use that. I'm saying that because I think a lot of HR people can use the bite model that Stephen Hassan
Mhm.
has created and has tested with multiple other, psychologists and sociologists, and he continually that's like his, like, life work right now, like, late in his career, is to make sure that it goes through enough testing. But you can use it to, as a point to show, is coercive control in this situation? Does this
Mhm.
group, are they do we have these behaviors of coercive control? It's meant to be a self-test, so you don't have to get all these people involved to see. You can start to kind of lay the groundwork for, there's a system of control at play in this group, in this community.
Yeah. That's a great response. And Scott said something that was great in the chat. He said, top roles are not leaders at all, merely managers, quote unquote, and poor ones at that. And I have a lot to say on that. You don't need a title to say that you're a CEO or founder to be a great leader. To me, great leaders come with empathy. They empathize. They're the ones that sit on the ground with their members and kind of look at them at eye level, and they allow collaboration, feedback. Even if it's feedback we don't want to hear, we still listen to it, right? They're not trying to put on this hero complex and accuse their members, their people, of mistakes that they did. And I had gone through that where I was accused of something with no facts, no evidence, but merely because they didn't want to um, look in the mirror and own their own mistake, right? So they started making assumptions and blaming me into that. But going back to Scott is, they play on people's insecurities a
Mhm,
lot to make themselves feel better, and downplaying and degrading and the belittling and the going. And there's just so much of that hero complex where
mhm.
you try to have everybody believe they're the hero, they're the true leader, so that people start to question their own sanity, their own beliefs, and like, is it me? And then they start blaming themselves for a lot of it. So I'm glad Scott said that not all leaders, not everybody's a leader. Some
Yeah.
people just micromanage a lot
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
control.
And leadership is all about, really giving people agency within, obviously within a framework. I think that's really big as in leadership, is agency and autonomy should always be looked
Hmm.
for. I think that's something for me that I look for, like, as when I job search or when I'm looking at contracts, is how much agency do I have? I realize there are things I have to
Hmm.
do and there's requirements, but within those requirements, there should still be some agency, right? And so
Hmm.
I think that that's always like that's the whole process of the bite model. Is the bite model is, which I will get into with a quote later, but that's what I was talking about with Stephen Hassan, is what's that, contingency between coercive control and personal agency, personal autonomy.
Hmm.
Where does your workspace, how does your boss, do they put, where are your leadership skills? Because I think we all have to be honest with ourselves, especially if we have histories of abuse and trauma. If there's attachment wounds, maybe that we haven't acknowledged, it could some of those be coming out into how we're leading. That's a self-analysis, but I think it's understanding this is a mirror, that these things are mirrors, and even for me, we're in leadership, no, we're all kind of have to kind of hold that both of those pieces.
Hmm.
we can be it's a lot to hold, but, like, you're from you are responsible for the agency that you give, and also, am I working my way through more of that coercive control pendulum, and constantly holding that in a balance, you
That's a
know?
good one, Julie, because here's the thing, and I always do a lot of check-ins and I do a lot of self-awareness. And I am my biggest critic. So for me, when I'm building out community, I'm always checking in with myself and saying, okay, for me, you want to be in a very inclusive, diverse space where it's not just one leader, but you can diversify the leaders and play up on their zones of genius and strengthen them and empower them to contribute. And I said, but I want you to flip it back on, and it's me talking to myself, flip it back on yourself. And are you exhibiting those behaviors too? Are you allowing growth and self learning in the spaces that you're hoping to build? So that's something I'm always telling myself to be mindful of is I'm wanting this, but am I also doing it as I'm building it out? And that keeps me like in alignment. And I ask a lot of questions. I mean, I've asked founders and CEOs about their missions, their values, their ethics, how they handle mistakes. Is there room for growth? Is there room for creativity? And if there's not every idea is taken in, how do you allow people to kind of build up on their strengths? If there's professional development, all that stuff. So that helps me kind of see where their leadership is and what they allow and don't allow. And if it's too rigid, I'm
Mhm.
running. I'm
Or
just bye.
I mean, and that's one of the reasons why integrate like, we built in a vetting process in our model in our
Hmm.
model. Because for me, I would rather know if like, what that is on the way in. I mean, for us, when I was rewriting our vetting process for Integrate's, human care specialist, I actually added in a question, "Do you understand the difference between a community and a cult?" Because for me, that gives me 2 things, one, I wanna know, is this education we probably need to do? Probably so. Anyways,
Hmm.
but is this someone also, like, how do you answer the question? I don't know, but I think it's a really important question to ask as people are coming in and vetting itself, yes, how do you make decisions with people? That's kind of how we have framed our vetting process, is how do you make decisions with people? How do you make decisions with diversity? How do you make decisions when mental health is on the line? You know? Because that matters in our, in our kind of community of practice. Um, but so that way when we're starting, we have people at this level playing ground and, hopefully it minimizes some of the surprises that might come
Hmm.
up for that. That's one of the reasons why when it comes to like a mental health community or any kind of wellness community, I 100% believe vetting is the way to go, when we start talking about these things because question I just question some of even the psychology tests I've taken for some roles, and I'm like, "How do people get through these?"
Hmm.
It's like, they're hard. I was
Very
like, "How"
complex, very deep.
they're complex,
Hmm.
So, all right, Scott says, hold on. Scott says, "As we progress in our careers, we get more aware of warning signs to this cult type blame behavior, but for someone less experienced, maybe fresh out of college who want to fit in and not make waves, what advice would you give them to accelerate their awareness of potentially hazardous environment?"
That's a great
I'm
question.
gonna say listen to Stephen. I would say freedom of mind. Um, I think I can put it in here. Okay. If not, just Google it. But I've mentioned people here. Freedom of mind. Stephen Hassan's his book. Anything by Stephen Hassan is going to teach you all about um all about what to look for. Um Amanda Montell's Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism.
Oh, I
Yes.
never heard
Thanks.
that one before. I gotta note
Oh,
this
that's
one.
yeah. Freedom of Mind, by Stephen Hassan. I don't know if my, comments are going into LinkedIn. It keeps on giving
No,
me the
no, they are. I
YouTube
can
thing.
see them. I'm watching 'em.
Okay,
No, and I'm
okay,
glad that
okay.
Scott said that question because when we're fresh out of college, we're excited, we're enthusiastic, we're motivated, which is a great thing, right? But we become a bit more prone to fall into these cults. And here's the thing, too, Scott, as I was researching and doing work, is cult leaders play on people's um, behaviors and characteristics, and they kind of flip it back and kind of gain control. And they're looking to see who they can mold and who they can kind of bring into their cult, and they don't allow room for growth. So you're not even allowed to question them. And they kind of look at the most quote unquote vulnerable people who are kind of experiencing things, and how can I play on that? So I love the fact that Julie said Freedom of Mind by Stephen Hassan, and being aware, because as I go into new spaces or even a new job position, I am breaking down those mission statements and asking them in conversations, because it's easy to kind of fall into these spaces without really realizing it. They're like, oh,
And
maybe.
and is your mission statement a word salad?
Yes, and do your words match your actions? And I break it down, and they look at me like, I can't believe this person's asking me, but I'm like, how do your words and your mission statement need to align with what you're doing within your company? Is it trickling down right into the members? Because I'm going to question it and say, Scott, these individuals are very curious, open-minded, and question, ask what you can to really break down. And then also do your research on these companies. Are there bad reviews? Are they being sued? I mean, that's a red flag to me, because I've seen them like, I mean, not to say that
But
every bad review is bad, but question it.
I will say though, sometimes they've got really good PR people who make sure
Hmm.
that those things are the very bottom of the Google
Yep.
sheet. So I think the bite model is really good to use as a self analysis when you're in a space. I think that that's why it's supposed to be used. Is you're supposed to use the bite model to do an analysis so you can make those decisions for yourself. So when you're in that, so you're not just like, this is what I feel like, I feel this way. It actually gives you numbers for yourself or for whatever, so you can actually kind of quantify some of the behaviors you're seeing, and you can speak the language of you know, sometimes numbers which seem arbitrary at times. But like that's the whole concept of the bite model, is it's supposed to help you do that self-analysis for yourself, but also be like, "Hey, I did this situation, it looks really it like on like this scale of like coercive control, it's like high on coercive control. We're like at red flags, like someone needs to come in here and like look at some things.
Hmm.
Um that's the point of it. So I of course research, of course those things, but I think that's why I continue to say that, because it does put it into a framework which can be measured, so it's not just like, so it makes it less hard for HR or for like the leaders to be like, "Oh, it's just hearsay. It's just hearsay." You know? 'Cause nothing is more dismissive from someone who has had these experience happen, and to have them be dismissed because it's just hearsay. But that's the law we have right now around this, is if there's not for abuse or even, like, sexual assault, we really have laws that, he said, she said, that's what these models, that's what Stephen Hassan's work, and even some of Rachel Bernstein's work, they're supposed to help us
Hmm.
overcome some of those barriers. So we're not just coming in with like a felt sense, but
Yeah.
we're coming in with actual statistics and proof in our situation when we are there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I want to add something to that. And then I want to go to Sarah, because I want to make sure we don't miss her comment either. Going back to what Julie said, when I was in my teaching space, a lot of the things that my boss, I'm not going to call her leader, because to me, a leader is somebody who can empathize, listener, really collaborate. So I'm going to stick with just boss right now. And she would do a lot of rubbing my arm. So when I had said, I need help or I'm not okay, I need you to listen to me, she would rub my arm every time and be like, honey, it's okay. You'll be fine. Get over it. The kids need you. So she was always downplaying the fact that I needed help. And that really bothered me until one day I said, one, don't touch me. Two, I am trying to talk to you and I need you to listen to me. And then she diagnosed me in that moment and said that I was depressed because
Mm,
I was asking for help. And this is what I mean by degrading and belittling and humiliating someone who's reaching out for help, when we should be saying, I need help, and not flipping it back and for people to second guess even reaching out. But yeah, there's a lot to say on that one. But Sarah had said, It's asking the person that's exhausted and trying to figure out how to work within that system to do more work to find a way to fit square peg into a round hole without support, and then putting the responsibility on the person, quote unquote, that's the problem, is asking them to pour out more where they don't likely to have that capacity. Yep, it's overworking them. Um,
Yeah,
and making them do more than they need to be doing to make them feel to make the other person feel better, the control part, right?
right. That's one of my big, pet peeves. I think I've said this already about restorative justice circles is that lots of times is what ended up happening when I used to do those with adults but that some of the curriculum I used to work with adults and with kids, it would it would try to be fair, but there was nothing fair when there was we have to look at equitable, okay? Because that's where some of the I think they're a little bit outdated. Some of those restorative justice curriculum that I was trained on, everything would try to be fair when we would actually need to be look at what was equitable. Was there a male and female? Was it a male female dynamic? Was there a marginalized person and someone in power in these dynamics? Because that's where we have to start looking at equity in this dynamic, systems of power, systems of abuse, more of these DEI issues. And where's Katie Kurtz? Here's DEI and trauma informed care coming in, you know,
Itchy
but
here.
that's a big error. And there's a big error in how we have done conflict resolution. Nothing's going to be fair when we're working with diverse people. We have to look at equity around that and what's equitable. What is everyone getting what they need in that situation, right? Because if there's this universal concept of fairness,
Mhm,
someone is gonna be feel dismissed, So that's where that trauma informed care in the frameworks in the business is 100% applicable,
mhm,
as we work with this. Also, shout out to Katie Kurtz who helps with those things. Um,
mhm. Our SME, our
um
lovely SME.
and
Uh,
Nicole Lewis Keebler, who I'll help with these things. Fear of retaliation, judgment is also a big one too. People stay quiet because it feels safer.
mhm,
Yeah. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit because we're 30 minutes in, and I want to get so we all know what it looks like. I think most people have been there. I want to talk about how flags. Okay, we talk about the red flags. We understand kind of what Femi and I have said. We know that there's not taking outside information, not taking feedback, micromanaging, and lots of times that also means secrets of sexual harassment might be kept under a rug, leaders not held accountable. These are all signs of a high control group, of a high controlled situation,
mhm.
okay, which means they would be high on the bite model. Um, in our continuum of agency and coercive control. So let's talk about what would be more on that agency side, because I don't think we talk about personal agency whatsoever in this space. And Famia, you did a great post about that. So can you talk about what does personal agency look like and we'll talk about what we do in integrate too. But what does it look like from what you put in that post last week?
Is it the one about the green flags
Yeah,
of
green flags.
communities?
Mhm.
And a lot of people will tell me, "How do you come up with these thoughts?" I was like, a lot of I would have to say everything I post either comes from experience, things that I've gone through, or very deep, very side conversations I have with people on the side. So to me, because I've been on the bad receiving end of being ignored, being dismissed, and being pushed out of spaces, because I was one that was a rebel and I still am. I speak up and I say, like, hey, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't look good. Um, it doesn't involve people. So for me, a healthy space is one where it's very collaborative, right? You're not isolated from the outside world. And if you try to reach out for help, it's okay, whether it's your colleague, your leader, or whoever it may be. And you're allowed to contribute in different ways, however, that feels comfortable. Like, I know with organizations and companies, they need structure. I get it. We have guidelines in the community, but we make it to where it's simple, it's clear, it's direct, and it makes sense. It's not taking away from somebody's individual sense of strengths, zones of genius, that you allow people to grow, you allow them to be creative, and you allow them to go into personal professional development where they can grow. So I would definitely say compassion needs to be in there, empathy, mentorship, guiding, um, somebody's support, however that looks like, and taking in feedback. Even we know that feedback may not be what we always want to hear, but we need to listen to it and we need to allow people to contribute in ways that feel healthy to them so they don't feel pressured, right? Or forced. And inclusive spaces, no matter what that looks like. But we need to ask people in the community, what does that look like for you? How do you want to contribute? So we need to empower those voices to allow them to speak,
Yeah.
to share, to say, this is how I want to contribute. This is what it looks like for me. And kind of taking all that feedback and really kind of, in a sense, um, provide these forums, these spaces. And I had seen, I think it was Abigail who had talked about, people stay quiet because it feels safer. Because, yes, they do fear they're going to be retaliated against. I mean, I'm one that was a victim of that. I never spoke up when I was a teacher because the pink slip, I have your evaluation dangling over your head.
It's real.
I was scared shitless. I'm going to say the word because I didn't want to lose my job
Mhm.
and I didn't want the rest of the gaslit members, friends, to
Yep.
come at me because I spoke up. And, we need to find spaces where privately somebody can talk to you. So that's why I think moderators are really important in having um, in a space to kind of watch. So, yeah, those are definitely psychological safety is a big one and as a green flag. If
And
you
I
can talk.
and I just wanna do a shout out because she's in the community space, or they are in the community space. Ruth Diaz has a really great, model on conflict resolution. Ruth has a
Hmm.
background in conflict, in, I think PhD in psychology, I believe, but therapist as well. And Ruth has a great model about how to navigate conflict resolution in a way that that is trauma informed and empowered, and thinks through equity and not through fairness.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to do a shout out for some of these people that are doing this work, that are experts specifically in what you were talking about, making sure that there's accountability and that no one has to go through that. So if you find Ruth on LinkedIn, um, Ruth's a really fantastic, resource on this, and I mean, trains on it, talks about it. So Ruth Diaz is your SME of, like, trauma-informed conflict resolution in the community space.
Let me see if I can find her and link her for everybody.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna
that's
find her for you
it's like
guys.
they're like
And
a consultant on this. So,
yeah.
but it's really important. It's important that that we are using models like the BITE model, like Ruth's model, okay, to address these things because 'cause they're already there. We don't have to keep reinventing. What was the definition of crazy is, like, keep doing things that don't work. We have people on LinkedIn that
Hmm.
are doing these things, that are using, so use your people. They are on LinkedIn, they are here, and we want to bring more voices and attention to people that are doing this work and have had success, in bringing these models to life, you know? So you're not in alone, there are resources out there for this. Specifically, in this particular situation, being alone in that situation, in conflict, we need to update our restorative justice conflict resolution frameworks. This fairness thing is like, it's not going to work. Like, it's like, it's kind of
Mm-mm.
like when, there's siblings and everyone's like, oh, everyone just hug. It's like the workplace, like that, and like that's not going to work. And like, that's not
Or you'll
psychological.
be okay. Don't worry, tomorrow's a new day.
Right.
No, let's figure this out now. And that's the point of having a healthy, true community is it's going to be chaotic because we're trying to figure out trial and error what works. Because what works for me is not going to work for you, Julie, or for everybody. So we have to kind of find a healthy medium to kind of work through um, these relationships. And
And
yeah,
sometimes
go ahead.
it just means space. Sometimes
Yeah.
there is no resolution. That's true. It was like, sometimes it's just space. Sometimes we're like, those people, um, what's it called? Those people are just going to be, um, there just needs to be space. Sometimes people just need to you just need to let we just need to let people, like, have space and not interact, you know, um, for a while. You know what I'm saying? So, I think on a leadership side of community, sometimes people just don't need to be in a relationship. And that's okay. And we need to be okay with people, not everybody being in a relationship, and letting people just be okay at a distance. And I think as a leader,
Yeah,
sometimes, I think in some trainings around conflict resolution, sometimes I think that that's hard to think that sometimes people just need space and time to like let things smooth over. Maybe there's something at home that's happening, but I think sometimes as leaders, sometimes we're like, everyone needs to get along. Like everyone needs on my team needs to get along. Everyone needs to like be respectful. And sometimes that's just not available in their world. They just can't they don't have capacity to take that in because that's like a
it's
whole
in a
sense.
perfect world that doesn't exist.
No,
Because
and that goes back to us as leaders being like, "Okay, you know what? As long as you're not inflicting harm on each other and you're giving each other space, I need to be okay with them having space, and I don't need to
yeah.
fix it, by the way."
Yeah.
You know?
And that's a good point because that reminds me about a session I had, and I want to go back to what Nadine said because I think that's a really, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that one, Julie. So with that, it's the communication piece, right? Because we know communication is one of the underlying behaviors to a real community, and it's having that open line, a very transparent, um, conversations going back and forth. And for me, I'm just an individual. If I'm going through something, I need my space. I do not do well with somebody that's coming at me from all different directions. I need space to kind of digest, really kind of absorb the information, process it, and then I will come back. So I think asking people, like, what is your communication style like? What is the process like for you? Do you want me to come to you right away, or are you somebody that needs space? And I tell people, I need space. I need you to respect it right now. And I will come to you when I'm ready because I need to figure my thoughts out first. So I think asking
Mhm.
people is another big one too. Like, what works for you?
R
What's healthy for you? What
right.
makes you comfortable?
Yeah, and that's actually maybe a good question to put in our future vetting process too. Now, like that's a great way to like start to sift that out too. Absolutely. I think asking people and sometimes people don't know because here's the thing about what I've learned about
Hmm.
in conflict is that sometimes people are so afraid of conflict that they don't know how they are. They can't
Yeah.
even answer that question because anytime conflict would come up, at least in my history of leadership, is like very few people have we gotten to that point. I think most of the people that that have gotten to that point, all of them because we're all in this space kind of working through these skills. But I've worked with a lot of people that whenever we've gotten to that point, they don't know because their association um with conflict is loss and abandonment.
Hmm.
So, conflict equals abandonment. So, I just want to, like, give voice to the fact that a lot of people can't even get to that point, and that's where I'm
Yeah.
saying sometimes that time and space is actually what is needed to, like, let whatever happened just sort of surf through their nervous system and reset. Sometimes the reset is what they need, but because that space, that regulation to be able to hold a little bit of tension knowing they won't be abandoned or be dismissed or betrayal isn't around the corner, you know,
Yeah.
like how
It's
families have
hard.
worked. So we're in our culture, we don't have that. I think we're just now getting to the point in our evolution where some of us are starting to be able to have these conversations in the workspace. But man, I'm telling you, even for me, I have got to go through a lot of training, a lot of leadership training, a lot of therapy myself in order to be able to sit here and be like, "I am okay. This is uncomfortable, but we're gonna be okay here, and I'm not gonna run out the door because 'cause I'm afraid of abandonment, so I'm gonna avoid it." You know?
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to vocalize, I don't know as a society if we're even there as a collective.
Yeah, and we have a long way to go, and this is why I think check-ins for me when I check in on my members or even personal, professional, like, "Hey, checking in, I haven't heard from you in a minute. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you, or how does that look like for you? Or when you're ready, I am here, when you
Right.
wanna speak and share all that." So having those, and here's something I do, and I know I okay, well, let me go back to Nadine's, because I thought it was a good comment. She said, bad reviews are important, but nowadays, even the small startups with no reviews or even ex employers are hard to gauge. How do you answer that? Because I'm like you, Nadine. I like to look at reviews, I take them with a grain of salt, but if I see a consistent pattern of bad review after bad review, that's a red flag for me. So, my next step, yeah, would be to find employers that work there. But what would be your take on that, Julie, or your
Oh, I think
thoughts on that
starting to
one?
do LinkedIn people, and I think the first I start because that's what I do. I'm like, "Hey, I see you work there. What's your thing?" And if they don't answer anything, red flag. That's a red
Yeah,
flag. If I get a no answer from them, that's a red flag that there might be some sort of, like, contract, some sort of, like, non-disclosure, something or other. I don't know what it would be, but that's just if they can't healthfully get back to me and say whether it's healthy or whether what the positives are, that's a red flag to me. So,
yeah.
I think that that's, like, the first line. Go find someone, work there, ask them how it is. If they don't respond and they see it, there might be a little bit of a red flag there.
Yeah, if I'm really interested in company, I'm kinda curious and I'm just naturally I'll ask for an informal chat,
Mhm.
just like a regular coffee chat, kinda very friendly, kinda pick their brain and kinda see, what it's like for them. I'm interested in anyone in the chat, like, how would you what would be your way of going about that too? So feel free to answer, Nadine's, thoughts. What would you do, to kinda gauge more of those reviews and see? And I like that I do it, Julie. I do it all the time. I'm like,
Yeah,
"Hey, let's have a chat."
silence says a lot. Silence communicates a lot,
Mhm.
silence to me, silence is a way of communication, still communicating without the words. Silence to me communicates that there's fear, there's some kind of maybe avoidance, there's something that doesn't feel safe enough for them for whatever reason to vocalize something authentically, so that's always a red flag that there might be some impact of coercive control on the that they might be more on that spec maybe they not be, like, in a high control group, but they might be more on the, um, other side of, maybe even just a little bit, just on the other side of, like, higher end of control, of coercive control, which is a spectrum. So, I just I think and that's where vetting is. Vetting's a two-way street, so we vet people coming in, people vet us. It should always be that way. It should always be that way. So,
And we
um
get asked that a lot, don't we? Like, "Why does Integrate" I get that asked in the side DMs, like, "Why does Integrate have a vetting process?" I'm like, "It's the same reason why companies hire you, because they are filtering in and filtering out people, and they wanna see who's in alignment, or do you almost have the shared values or, the shared alignment, so that way it filters out miscommunication, confusion. I mean, you could be the best people, but, you may not be aligned, so you may be vetted out, and it has nothing to do with your character or you as a whole, but just maybe your alignment is just not there, and it happens, and that's something that we have to kind of, in a sense, learn to accept, and it's hard to be rejected, but I mean, for me, I want to be in a space where I know I'm going to align and I can grow fully as a
Yeah.
whole, as opposed to half, um
So we have a couple
blink
people
the next or
here.
two.
Someone says, "I think asking the hard questions is important, and unwillingness to engage is a red flag, and to steer clear of those spaces."
Hmm.
Yes. Scott says, "During the interview, ask if you were king or queen for a day, what positive changes would you make in the company that could never be undone?" Whatever their answer is, that's the area of dysfunction.
I
But
mean, I love Scott. Scott's gonna throw it to you. Scott's gonna be the one that's gonna give you the raw, the hard truth, those
yeah,
direct questions. And that's the thing, what Abigail said is people fear asking, but we have to understand that it's a two-way conversation. They're looking to see if you're aligned, but we need to see if they're a good alignment for us
yeah.
as well. So we have to ask.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that also is, another sign of a healthy leader that I've seen. This is more in entrepreneurial settings, and maybe even it should be is, one thing I do, like, when I'm working with, when I'm doing more, like, coaching or I have coaching clients kind of in peer coaching, or if I'm coaching consulting, I always give people former clients to interview of mine. So and I also do that for Integrate too, speaking of our vetting process, when I do our intakes, I do a 1-month Q&A on our vetting process, and I give people, names of people are in our community so they can ask away from me. And they can ask the hard questions in email if they want to. So I try to give those names out, and they can go to anybody really in our on our list and ask. It doesn't have to be just people I recommend because that's also, like, biased too. Like, they could go to anybody. I just try to filter those not 30 people they can ask, but they could honestly ask anybody, and do that. So they can do their own vetting. Um, So I think that that's a really I know that's something in like ethical coaching that is done, and a couple of coaches I know have do that as well, like more the life coaches, not just what I do, which is more of like internal coaching. But anyway, so I think yeah, I think that those are all really great aspects. And for me and I wanted to end and talk a little bit about what to do if you are in a situation of high control. And I want to end
Mhm.
with that because I know that that's happening and that's real. And it might be work related, it might be wellness related, it might be your family. So,
Mm.
because again, coercive control doesn't matter whether it's a family member or a system, it's all there, right? That's why that the bite model, all these things, it doesn't matter whether we call it domestic abuse or we call it a cult, we call it culty, it's all under this framework of coercive control, which is why we call it that. So if you're in so first, I think from a workspace, if you're in a space where you know that you're on the high end of coercive control, I would 100% start getting the bite model. Um, Hi, Phil. Phil's here. Your friend Phil's here. Anyway, 100% would start doing a self-analysis of the bite model and start getting those going. Start kind of taking that analysis going. Start listening to Rachel Bernstein. Her podcast Indoctrination is phenomenal. They give like real suggestions and good suggestions on how to navigate, coming out of a cult. She actually has a support group for people online. And she vets too. She vets people coming in because she wants to make sure that your situation is helpful for everybody else. It's a great example of someone that also vets people coming in for some of the same reasons we do. Fihmiya. So she vets her support group for obvious reasons, just like we vet for our community for similar reasons.
I mean,
Um,
it's understandable that you would actually go that route. I mean, it just makes sense when you are hosting a very intimate group, you want to make sure that you have healthy individuals um, that want to build up that psychological space. And what's kind of worked for me when I was going through that very toxic cult like experience is I went to a very, very, very trusted friend of mine that I've known for years who knows me inside out. And if you have someone also talking to her, and I would explain the behaviors and I kept writing them down and I kept telling her, she's like, there's a repeated pattern of very coercive control, micromanagement, very much you need to be a perfectionist. You cannot go outside for any resources. You only talk to us. She's like, that's just very, very, very odd behavior. That is not quote unquote normal behavior. And I went to a therapist because I could and I could afford it at that time. And I know it's not something everybody can afford, but if there's somebody you can speak to that you very much trust that will give you unbiased feedback, that's another thing to do because sometimes they are very good at shifting the blame back to you and making you feel like you are the problem, you are the issue. Um, that something's wrong with you, literally. And when it becomes repeated behavior, we start to believe that, right? So that's something to be very mindful of, the self-awareness piece.
um,
So yeah, my bestie was my lifesaver, and so was
yeah,
my
and I
therapist.
and I think the other thing is making sure you have a therapist that understands coercive control. 'Cause not all of them do, and I think that
Mhm.
that's something that you can screen a therapist on to make sure that they have that understanding of coercive control. Because not all of them do, and that understand that they're not, so I think, you can find cult specialists, like therapists that understand or even domestic abuse therapists sometimes will have a good understanding of how to work from this on a systemic level, but again, narcissism, coercive control, all of these things are on that continuum, whether you're working with one person, a system of people, or a whole spiritual system or a whole spiritual system, you know? Um, it's that self-awareness. Yes, Phil, 100%. And that's where, like I said, Rachel Bernstein, a little bit culty, Sarah Edmondson's, um, uh podcast they're all Nixium survivors. If you haven't watched the Nixium what is it called? What's their documentary called? I always forget the name of it. Oh, The Vow. Just
Oh,
FYI,
yes, the one that's
season
the
2 is
Netflix series.
FYI content. I mean, I don't like to give content warnings, but season 2 does get a little heavy, really heavy and slightly, like, we do go into personal a lot of trauma in that one, so that one is a little bit
I'll
can be
take
a
it.
little bit hard to take, but it's real, and that's how far some systems can go. So I think it's really important to know that these are happening in your backyard. This is happening that's being a lot of people are being groomed on it, so I think understanding the signs of when you're being groomed is really important on social media. That's huge too. Am I being sucked in? Am I being
Mhm.
sucked into someone? How do I know when I'm being sucked in? Because that's a sign that the early stages of brainwashing, of that control. Am I being sucked into a relationship? Am I being sucked into an ideology? Do I have to go to this person's Instagram to see what they're saying? All early signs of being sucked in. Okay, that's
I do
always
wanna add something to that, the love bombing. Oh my
yeah.
gosh, the love bombing, and if it's way too good to be true, question it, right? Because we know
Mhm.
that community spaces are not perfect. They're imperfect, right? We
Right,
work to build up to healthy spaces, and love bombing was something that was very much thrown at me. The very, um, just stary like the gazes, the really hard gazes and the very, big wide smiles that just never stopped.
right.
And I noticed that a lot, a lot. So I would question a lot of this too, because yeah,
Yeah.
healthy spaces are not meant to be perfect, right? They're a bit chaotic. We're exploring, we're discovering. They're
What's
healthy, they're organic, they're natural.
um okay, so what
And
is
it's
love
love bombing.
bombing? And, so the early stage that's really important because that's the early stages of, all these things, love bombing, all those things. I'm gonna put a resource up. I think it might come up. If not, I will put it in the chat somewhere, or I will link it. Um, those are all early stages of abuse, okay? So love bombing is when someone, like, showers you with affection early on in a relationship, whether it's work or
Mhm.
in a romantic relationship, they'll shower you with compliments. They will make you feel like you are the center of the world, okay?
Constantly.
Constantly. And, like, it will feel amazing, especially if you have any attachment wounds or childhood trauma wounds, I that's true of me in my lives, multiple spaces. I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so special, da 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 da," and I would get sucked in.
Mhm.
That was the sucking in, that was the grooming piece. The love bombing is the grooming. And then I would need that affection. I would need that, like, I'm a people pleaser, so I would try to people please, and I would, like, perform at high levels to exhaustion,
Because it
and then
feels great.
they flip the script on me, and there's not enough. I can never do enough, and then I constantly am overperforming and overperforming and overperforming. And that's that thing from love bombing to then they would then, like, I would disappoint them for something. I'd be like, "Oh, I want that feeling back. I'm gonna perform more. I'm gonna exhaust myself. I'm gonna perform more." And then I wouldn't get that feedback, and that's the abuse. That's where it turns into
Mhm.
that coercive control, where they're feeding me that affection that I need emotionally at work, in more in other times of my life, especially in my younger days
Mm.
in my younger days, working with a lot of different companies and professions, I would need that. And then, and then they would stop, and then they would just cold shoulder me, they would void me, they would not answer my call as a worker, and that's the first sign some of those first signs of
Mhm.
you're in coercive control. You're under that. And
Yeah.
that's not even a red flag, that's like 10 in 1.
Yeah. It's a gaslighting and a manipulative tactic, right? We're so
Mhm.
used to that praise, that feel good emotion, but when we don't get it, we're like, okay, then like what you said, Jill, we got to keep working harder and harder and harder to keep getting it right. And the other thing too with cults, which kind of goes into the love bombing when they give you all that praise, is like you want to work even harder and harder to continually get that praise. And they will
Right.
make you overwork even outside of your and that starts kind of seeping into your personal space too, as
Mhm.
you give your full commitment to them because again, the hero complex, which then
Yeah.
kind of infuses the love bombing.
Yeah. So if you look at that's where I think at least season 1 of The Vow is really important. It's a really good educational opportunity if you have HBO Max, or I think it was the one by Amanda the cultish one, the one that someone keeps referring to in
Abigail
here.
said?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
How to
Abigail. I
Become a
can't
Cult
spell
Leader?
all I see is LinkedIn users, so that's all I see. So whoever said that. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so all of those are all really good opportunities to learn because the early education of coercive control will help you see those red flags. Like when I see them now, I'm like, okay, I saw that. I hope I didn't want to see it, but I saw it. And now I know that I don't have to go through tons and tons of abuse in order to get to the other side. I don't have to sit around and wait for that. And it was like, and so I think that's sneaky. Yeah, it is sneaky. And yeah, absolutely. It is sneaky. It's sneaky in romantic relationships and it's sneaky in work relationships. So I just want to make sure that if like I said, if you are in that, Rachel Bernstein has a support group. You can reach out to Fihmiya and I and we can restate these resources to you. But Stephen Hassan, they all have podcasts. Like I feel like everybody that has been through this kind of abuse, they're all like, can we help you? Like literally for free. Can we like there's not enough support out there, and I wish in the trauma informed world I really want their yes. Oh my gosh, I
Yep,
just
that's
listened
what Sarah Edmondson, the sex trafficking,
they
that was a
they
tactic.
they are, and actually, I listened to an old podcast by Stephen Hassan yesterday that I sent to you, Fihmiya, and actually, he
Mhm,
said that the only way that we're able to get into because he's trying to get the laws changed, so there's more accountability around psychological abuse in marketing and in business. um,
mhm, mhm.
he's
It gets
really
people
good
to buy.
and the only way that they have been able to get to Congress, and they've gotten there, is to say that it's trafficking, because it is, 'cause it's for some people, it does
Wow,
get to that, and so that they're using the same tactics as sex trafficking, and that's the only way that they have gotten Congress and some of our lawmakers to look at, psychological abuse was to, they have to frame it as sex trafficking,
that's crazy.
tactics, 'cause it's still coercive control.
Yeah,
So
and there's something, maybe a part 2, but there's also in the cults, I know we're, like, out of time, we went over time, is the loaded language, right? They have, like, these special traditions and these rituals that kind of feel kind of odd, right? You're kinda
mhm,
question them, but then you're like, "Okay, well, I think this is just part of it because
yeah, but
it
again,
feels really good."
I would just start to listen to those podcasts and just start to get those education because again, Sarah, Rachel, Steven, all of them have free content and they just want you all to stay safe. And I learned a lot of my healing process from listening to them, from some of my more cultier moments in the workspace and even in relationships, because again, cults are abusive relationships. So
And they
there's just
happen more often than we realize, so that's something
yep,
to also
your
keep in
hot yoga
mind.
class. Oh yeah, and I think Sarah's TED Talk is really good too. It's a good primer.
Oh, that one? Yes.
Yeah.
I'll share that with everyone, after the live. I'll have to link it, but it's a really very
Oh,
short clip. It's about
what's
15 minutes.
what's that favorite workplace? We are family.
Oh,
Yes.
I run. Okay, that's to me, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
When they say we are a family, I'm like, no pass.
Right.
I
Right.
used to fall for it.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, when I learned the insides, I was like, I am running
I was
the
like,
other way.
does that mean
Bye.
you scapegoat your employees? Because I'm out the door. So
Yeah, we are a family, so, like, what does that look like for you? Yeah, I question
Agree.
those, but I will not even bother even applying for positions that even state that, because
Yeah.
to me, that's kind of like red flag.
Yeah. So we're gonna start doing these monthly. We're gonna start having some talks. So if there's anything else you're looking for in terms of community development, obviously, if you want us to come back to coercive control, we 100% will always come back to this. But we're gonna be doing these on a monthly basis on Integrate. So follow us for more topics on, trauma, workplace trauma, healing, community development, coercive control. That's our jam. So,
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us, and if you guys have any other questions, Julie and I are more than happy, to answer them. Shoot us a DM because I know this is not a topic that is, like, normalized, but it is a topic that we need to discuss when it comes to community building and creating very healthy spaces, intentional ones, um,
right.
because
Well,
perfect does not exist, so
Well, and I
let's
think that
always be mindful of
there
that.
also, especially for community managers, there needs to be an understanding that, especially trauma survivors, because of coercive control, there's gonna be problems coming together, and
Mhm,
there's gonna be because like a community manager, could be a coercive controller, and so I think understanding this from multiple lenses, how's this, do you have trauma survivors in your community? And if that's the case, what can I expect? What's it called? What can I expect? How do I need to shift my behavior, for
mhm.
people that who are victims of coercive control? because any domestic abuse survivor, any person, that's not just cults, anyone probably that's gone through domestic abuse or any kind of child abuse is a trauma survivor, and is a victim of coercive control. So there you go.
Stay tuned for more, people. But just want to say thank everybody for being in here. Abigail for sharing those amazing resources, the questions. Wyatt, Nick, Scott, Neela, everybody, Phil. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. So if you need anything, reach out to us and talk to us and ask questions.
Yeah. And then I don't know where my QR code. Okay. Did that come up? Did the QR code come up? This is Lissa Rankin's notes on Rachel Bernstein's podcast. Did that come up for you all?
Would that show up in the comments, Julie,
It should come up in
no?
It should come up on the in the live.
All right, let me double check. You are welcome, Abigail, and thank you so much, Scott and Wyatt. I don't see it, so I didn't see it.
Okay, I'm not sure how to add that feature yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Show. Okay, I'm showing it now. It says it's showing. Okay. So anyway.
No,
what?
Oh, I thought you wanted to say, I wanted to ask Phil if he had seen it.
Okay. So anyway, so if that is coming up at the QR and you want to read something right now, this is Lissa Rankin's notes on Rachel Bernstein's podcast on how to trust the red flags of what to trust and not trust in any kind of community development space. Okay. So I would just maybe bookmark that QR code. I'll leave it up for about the next 2 minutes so we can make sure that people get that resource. So anything Rachel or Lissa does is worth reading. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's that. So if you can also put it in the chat too. So I just want to keep it up a couple more moments and we'll go. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. And we'll share this as well. So if you want to come back and watch it later.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
All right.